Wer aus der Geschichte lernt, ist das so verdammt. Sie so wiederholen. Those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat past mistakes. Wer weiß, wann kämpfen muss und wann nicht. Wer in 1000 Schlachten nicht verlieren. He who knows when to fight and when not to fight shall not lose in 1,000 battles. Welcome to our Novi Global Network. I will explain. So, in the spat with the US and Venezuela, big geopolitical spat, now Grenada, of all the Caribbean countries, was actually, based on its experience, best positioned to deal with the situation if it had taken into consideration its past experience, learn from that, and let that be a guideline for dealing with the situation between the US and Venezuela. And what do I mean? Grenada has had enormous experience being put in the middle of geopolitical confrontation. We're talking about the PRG from 1979 to 1983. For those of you who may not know, Grenada was allied with the Russians via Cuba in the middle of what was termed back then a Cold War between the United States and then what was referred to as the USSR. Okay? The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which modern day Russia was the dominant figure. So at that time, the two superpowers were jockeying for influence and power across the globe. And Grenada, in the middle of this political dynamic, in the early 80s, decided they were going to look to Cuba and the Russians and the socialist Marxist world for help. It was said that initially, after the overthrow of Sir Eric Matthew Gary, that Grenada approached the United States via its embassy in Barbados to try to get some sort of assistance and was turned down. So it is reasoned that is why they looked to Cuba and the Soviet world for assistance. I'm sure many of us know what happened between 79 and 83. There was a socialist Marxist government that eventually imploded on October 19th, 1983. Then subsequently, on October 25th, the United States, with assistance from Caribbean allies, invaded Grenada. That, of course, ended with the destruction of the then PRG government and people who were convicted of accused crimes of October 19th. So people who are in their 50s and above would understand a little bit of that history of Grenada. So you would have thought, in modern times, when confronted with a similar situation where Grenada had to make certain choices and Grenada had to decide what to do in this geopolitical game that is even more ferocious and vicious, that Grenada might have been, because of its collective history and because of its past experiences, would have been in the best position and well equipped to navigate this in a very shrewd and ultimately beneficial manner for Grenada. But unfortunately, what we saw were confrontational speeches, bravado, and misplaced, delusional projection of power. And unfortunately, what we saw was misplaced, delusional, antagonistic speech that was downright inviting, just like was done in the early 80s by the then leadership of the PRG, inviting some sort of unwanted attention to the current administration. Now I want to know, was it a coincidence in the response, erroneous response in the early 80s, and the exact same response in this time? Is it a coincidence? Now it is also said that it is no mark of brilliance to see the sun shining on a bright sunny day. Everyone can see. But what is more brilliant is the ability in dark clouds to see the possibility of sunshine coming up. So now, everything that was being said months ago by yours truly has come to pass. And everyone was saying, oh, what is this guy talking about? Stand up and be brave. And they could not see what I was trying to tell them. And if this was a laughing matter, or if this was a matter where you could revel in victory, probably I would have. But unfortunately, it isn't. It is a sad situation. The consequences are detrimental to the society. The consequences have grave effects on the people in the society. So you can't laugh. You can't revel in what is going on. But in some respects, you're saddened and disappointed that people could not see what you are trying to tell them. And now everybody sees. There are people who are some of my most ardent critics. There were people who say, hey, Wamti. Some people are like, hey, Wamti, why are you trying to bow to these people? And they will call you all sorts of names. But as I always say, I'm a Wolfman, so names don't move me. So the point I am making is that Grenada had an opportunity to have dealt with this, and the leadership had an opportunity to have dealt with this differently. Tactful, diplomatic, and extreme cautious maneuvering. But instead, they deluded themselves and they were advised by obviously incompetent advisors. And now, unfortunately, they have to face the stark reality of the situation. You see, when you make statements and you do things as a statesman, you have to understand that the implications of what you say and do is not just for you anymore, but there could be dire implications for the people you govern. So it's like a father or mother or any parent. Your actions and the things you do, you have to be careful because it could have consequences for the people who you are responsible for. So you have to understand war and waging war, and I'm not talking about some sort of confrontational war, because I want you to understand that everything in this life, on some level, is a battle. Even if you don't come to physical blows, everything that you do, especially in the annals of politics and the annals of government, it is a battle. Even when you're looking for funding, it is a battle. So it should be approached as some sort of battle. Even in the annals of global negotiations, it is a battle. It may be a psychological battle, but it is a battle on some level. So when you're confronted with a situation that has global implications, where global powers are fighting or jostling for influence and power, you have to be extremely careful in what you say and what you do as a government. And you have to ensure that what you're doing is in the best interest of the people who you're supposed to be caring for. You may have personal feelings or you may be emotional about certain things, but you cannot externalize your personal emotions and personal feelings, because that will be perceived as a government and a collective position of the nation. So when your media, act irresponsible, and in this time where everything is seen within seconds or milliseconds, you have to understand that the perception of your nation is based on what your collective media project. Your perception of the nation is based on what your collective government project. Your perception of your nation is also what your people collectively say. But I understand the mass of people sometimes are reckless and do not carefully consider what they say or do. And that is why you have leadership. Leadership in media, leadership in government, leadership in civic society, which has totally disappeared in Grenada. That is where leadership comes in. So that the regular man or mass of people can take cues from those they look up to as leaders. With your influence comes responsibility. And you have to understand that your words have power. The age-old adage that the power of life and death lies with the tongue. So that is the first thing a politician or someone who's entrusted with the protection of any state should understand. If you don't understand these fundamental concepts of statesmanship, then you're not up to the task. You're in the wrong business. So if, when confronted with that situation that required extreme diplomacy and maneuvering, if the statesmen had seen this as some sort of battle on some level, they would have estimated their resources to deal with the situation. And they would have realized that they had to veer on the side of caution, tact, and diplomacy. Because for all the socialist Marxist brotherhood that existed in 1983, and you had competing powers, and there was a better balance of power in the world, okay? For all that brotherhood that existed, guess what? When the United States invaded Grenada on October 25th, 1983, you know who was left on the battlefield? You know who was left to fend for themselves? Grenada. Not one other socialist Marxist nation was able to send a MiG, was able to send a man, or was able to send any or come to any assistance of Grenada at the time. And Grenada alone, with outdated, antiquated, some World War II weapons, in some cases, and relatively primitive weapons, had to face one of the most sophisticated armies in the world. And their young boys had to perish in defense of their land. Nobody didn't come to their aid. Nobody didn't send some plane to intercept what was going on because they knew they couldn't. So these people who sat on the sidelines understood that they had to veer on the side of caution and stay out of it. In that was a lesson for Grenada. A lesson that should have been learned. Don't invite a situation that you're not equipped to deal with. And it's the same thing that happened in the early 80s with these guys in 83. They invited a situation. They had so much bravado. Let them come, we'll bury them in the sea. And when they came, what happened? Some of them, generals and all, were saying, oh my gosh, they're going to use the B-52s and bury us in the ground. Some of them, lieutenants and all, were saying, where am I going to live? Where am I going to go? And they had a good situation where they could have just continued riding and take it easy and live good. But sometimes we get too pompous with ourselves. And that is the consequence of being arrogant and pompous. So all these people are being disrespectful to Kamla Bissessa. Now, in retrospect, are saying, oh, Kamla navigated this very well. Brilliant, brilliant. And the people who are brazen bozos who went into the media and calling her a drunk, guess what? She was extremely sober and vigilant and understood the possible outcome and prepared herself for the possible outcome. They always tell you a great planner begins with the end in mind. So the gentleman, the old leftist radical gentleman who was calling her a drunk, guess what? She wasn't drunk. It was you who was drunken. It was you who was drunk on philosophy. Doctrinal, deluded philosophy. So you, even in your analysis of the situation, lost. You, even in your encouragement of how Grenada should have proceeded on those issues, you utterly misguided Grenadian politicians and Grenadians collectively. Going forward, no one in their right mind should listen to anything that you have to say on the subject or any related subject. You and your protege should be utterly, intellectually rejected by the mass of Grenadian society. And God help those who listen to what you've got to say. I pray that you don't become any advisor to anyone on any platform, especially people who are aspiring to political office. It would be in their best judgment to stay clear from you, to stay far away from you, like if it was a bad political disease, for their own good. The bottom line, to wrap up, is that Grenada was actually best positioned in all of the islands to handle this situation and to navigate this situation because it had experiences. Grenada collectively as a nation should have known better. They shouldn't have to wait till the consequences arrived at their doorstep. Because it is said in life, it is easier to stay out of a difficult situation than to get into a difficult situation and try to find yourself out of it. Remember, the matters of statesmanship and the matters of state, you become the arbiter of the life and death and destruction of whether the state succeeds or whether the state loses. Always, as a statesman, keep that in mind. And that, my friends, is sound advice to any and everyone that aspires to political office in Grenada.